Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So this morning we're continuing with Canto 10, Chapter 49, and there are two texts for today, text 3 and text 4. So text 3 is on the board. Yatavad upasangamya bandubir gandini sutta samprishtastas suridvartam svayam kaprichad avyayam yatavad upasangamya bandubir gandini sutta samprishtastai suridvartam svayam kaprichad avyayam yatavad upasangamya bandubir gandini sutta samprishtastai suridvartam svayam kaprichad avyayam. Please chant. Yatavad upasangamya bandubir gandini sutta samprishtastai suridvartam svayam kaprichad avyayam. The word for word. Yatavat, appropriately. Upasangamya, meeting. Bandubi, with his relatives and friends. Gandini Sutta, Akura, son of Gandini. Samrishta, inquired from. Tai, by them. Surit, of the dear ones. Vartam, for news. Svayam, himself. Cha, in addition. Aprichat, asked. Avyayam, about their well-being. And the translation for text 3 is as follows. After Akura, the son of Gandini, had appropriately greeted all his relatives and friends, they asked him for news of their family members, and he in turn asked about their welfare. And text 4. Uvasha katichin masan rajnovrita vivitsaya dus prajas yalpasarasya kala chandanuvartinaha. And the translation for text 4. He remained in Hastinapur for several months to scrutinize the conduct of the weak-willed king who had had sons and who was inclined to give in to the whims of mischievous advisers. Om Jnanatimirandasya Gananjana Shlakaya Chakshurumilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Scha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahita Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Pada Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitamscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapsa Kanchana Gorangi Radha Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye. Vanchakalpa Taribhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimate Ramapada Swami Iti Namine. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. So this particular chapter describes Akura's visit to Hastinapura and his return to Mathura after learning about Dhritarashtra's treatment of the Pandavas. So Srila Prabhupada writes, and this is from Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So I'm quoting, "Thus ordered by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, Akura visited Hastinapura, said to be the site of what is now New Delhi. The part of New Delhi, still known as Indraprastha, is accepted by the people in general as the old capital of the Pandavas. The very name Hastinapura suggests that there were many hastas or elephants because the Pandavas kept many elephants in the capital, and it was known as Hastinapura. This is Srila Prabhupada continuing, keeping elephants is very expensive. To keep many elephants, therefore, the kingdom must be very rich. And Hastinapura, as Akura saw when he reached it, was full of elephants, horses, chariots, and other opulences. The kings of Hastinapura were taken to be the ruling kings of the whole world. Their fame was widely spread throughout the kingdom, and their administration was conducted under the good counsel of learned brahmanas, close quote. So that's Srila Prabhupada writing, describing the place that Akura was visiting and the position of the particular dynasty there and something of the wealth of that particular capital. Now here Akura is specifically asking his relatives and friends about their welfare. Avyayam was the word used, and this is the one-line commentary of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So Srila Prabhupada, he writes, so this is expanding upon this. All those who met Akura, known also as the son of Gandhini, were very much pleased to receive him and inquire about the welfare of their respective relatives. He was offered a good seat at his reception, and he in turn inquired all about the welfare and activities of his relatives. So this is Srila Prabhupada writing in Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So obviously persons living in Hastinapura and persons living in Mathura, there were family interrelationships. So there was a mutual inquiry. Now, text 4 reveals the purpose of Akura's spending several months in Hastinapura. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he explains, why this is the case, that Akura was to spend several months in Hastinapura. So, quoting from Srila Vishwanath. Akura wanted to observe the behavior of the king, who had wicked sons. And the words that we used were dus prajasya asat, who was weak-willed, and the words that we used were alpa sarasya manda dritaha, and whose nature was to follow the desires, a chanda, of mischievous men like Karna, close quote. So he's encapsulated the purpose for Akura's visit. And of course, Akura had been deputed by Lord Krishna to visit Hastinapura. And this is, if we backtrack in the previous chapter, there was actually Krishna making this request of Akura. So these were Krishna's words to Akura. You are indeed the best of our friends. So please go to Hastinapura and, as a well-wisher of the Pandavas, find out how they are doing. Those were Krishna's words to Akura. And Lord Krishna had continued by way of explanation. So this is prior to Akura's visit, the words of Krishna to Akura, explaining to him why he was making this request of Akura. We have heard that when their father passed away, the young Pandavas were brought with their anguished mother to the capital city by King Dhritarashtra, and that they are now living there. So, statement of fact. And Krishna further adds, these are his words to Akura prior to this visit, indeed, weak-minded Dhritarashtra, the son of Ambika, has come under the control of his wicked sons, and therefore that blind king is not treating his brother's sons fairly. Those were the words of Krishna to Akura. And Krishna further added, go and see whether Dhritarashtra is acting properly or not. When we find out, we will make the necessary arrangements to help our dear friends. So those were Krishna's words to Akura. Very clear and precise. And in effect, Lord Krishna is asking for some observation of King Dhritarashtra's behavior on the path of Akura. And this was that one-line purport of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So that's the purpose of Akura's visit. Or at least it wasn't merely a visit. He was actually going to be observing for several months the behavior of King Dhritarashtra. Now there's mention by Srila Vishwanath that Dhritarashtra was weak-willed, with a nature to follow the desires of mischievous men like Karna. So notwithstanding these characteristics, meaning he's been weak-willed and this tendency to follow mischievous persons' advice or desires, Srila Prabhupada writes that since Akura had been deputed by Lord Krishna to visit Hastinapura, it is understood that Akura was very intelligent in being able to study a diplomatic situation, because that's actually his occupation. He's a minister. And Dhritarashtra was So that's the purpose. And then considering a little bit what's the actual situation. Dhritarashtra was unlawfully occupying the throne after the death of King Pandu, his brother, despite the presence of Pandu's sons. So that's the reason for the unlawfulness of it. The sons of the king are present, but he is occupying the throne. So this is from Srila Prabhupada's writing this specifically in Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the reason for the death of Pandu is that he had approached one of his two wives, Madri, one spring day, and the description is on a day that excites the heart and calls for love and adventure. That's the description. So despite her words of warning, his amorous advances evoked the curse he had received years before, and so he died. So it was a premature death, but due to the fact that he gave in to his amorous desires, that allowed the curse to act, because he'd been cursed that were he to be in such a situation, that would be the moment that he would die. So after building a funeral pyre, Madri had requested Kunti to take care of the 5 boys. And she entered the fire, meaning Madri, to follow her husband into the next life. Now, Mahabharat, and I'm referencing Mahabharat by Sankirtan Das, mostly because I've used this book for teaching young persons, and also it's very simply explained everything. So in that Mahabharat of Sankirtan Das, he says that Kunti and the 5 boys returned to the capital city of Hastinapura, where they resided in the royal palace under the care of King Dhritarashtra. And this is how he describes. So this is in Sankirtan Das Mahabharat. The Pandava boys mingled freely and unpretentiously with nobles and commoners alike. Upon seeing them, all the citizens were reminded of the nobility and generosity of their father. Dhritarashtra, however, did not relish their presence. They were a constant ache in his heart. Dhritarashtra only held the crown as a temporary steward for Pandu's eldest son, Yudhisthira. The blind king had 100 sons of his own who were known as the Kauravas, the eldest being Duryodhana. Dhritarashtra longed for his own sons to be the heirs to the kingdom. So that's the description of the situation in Hastinapura in Mahabharat. Now, continuing from Mahabharat, from Sankirtan Das, he writes on the thinking of the king. So, quoting from Mahabharat. In one sense, he knew in his heart this desire was illicit, meaning King Dhritarashtra. So remember, this is his thinking. But was he not the firstborn? Why should he not be the king? What did it matter that he was born blind? Why was he forced to live in the shadow of his brother? Why did Providence continue to mock him? So that's the thinking of King Dhritarashtra as outlined in Sankirtan Das's Mahabharat. Now, interestingly, there's comparison made as to how one can test the quality of a king. So this is the comparison that's made. It comes from a very nice compilation entitled The Way of Kings. So it's drawn from different Puranas. The quality of gold is tested by 4 methods: rubbing, cutting, burning, and crushing. The quality of a king is tested by 4 means also: knowledge, conduct, honor, and the ability to make sacrifices. Now, the quality of conduct is in question by Lord Krishna. So, further understanding of the conduct of a king is the following. Because if we remember, one of the instructions given to Akrura by Lord Krishna was to actually ask Akrura, go and see whether Dhritarashtra is behaving properly or not. So the conduct of King Dhritarashtra, that's in question. So further understanding of the conduct of a king is the following. So this is again drawing from the Way of Kings. The king is the embodiment of 7 persons: father, mother, teacher, brother, friend, Kuvera the god of wealth, and Yama the god of punishment. So that's the summary of the persona of a king. So as the father, the king takes care of the needs of his children. As the mother, the king nourishes his dependents and forgives their mistakes. So it's in the latter case that there's a question whether King Dhritarashtra is nourishing his dependents, those dependents being the sons of the now dead Pandu. So that's the question that's Akrura is having to look at. So as the teacher, the king is supposed to advise his subjects and provide for their education. So this is the part, both being as the teacher and in that sort of part of that persona of the king, of the mother persona of actually nourishing his dependents. That's the part that one's going to have to is going to have to be looked at by Akrura. And in Mahabharata, again Sankirtan Das, he describes something of how the coexistence of the Pandavas and the Kauravas was taking place. So this is the description. The Pandavas and the Kauravas grew up together. From the very beginning, a rivalry emerged between them. Yudhisthira was heir apparent, and Duryodhana could never forget this fact. Duryodhana was by nature envious and conniving. He became consumed with a desire for power beyond measure, and he secretly vowed to let no one stand in his way. So that's a nice description of what's actually going on in this kingdom of Hastinapura, with King Dhritarashtra supposedly giving the nourishment to his dependents. This is actually in the very close palace quarters, the rivalry that's present there between the 2 kings, or the one deceased king and Dhritarashtra's sons. So naturally, this description has implications for the king in his role of advising his subjects. So there's an incident related in Mahabharata, again Sankirtan Das. So I'm going to relate the incidents because it highlights something of how the king functioned in his role. So here's the rivalry, how it goes on between the 2 sets of noble boys. Bhima's favorite trick was to jump in the river whenever the Kauravas were frolicking. he would grab 6 or 7 of the boys, take them under the current with him. He was huge for his age. Bhima had no trouble staying under the water for a length of time. In the steel-like grip, the cousin struggled helplessly. At the last minute, he would let them go, and they would shoot to the surface, gasping for air. Bhima was often frustrated with the gentle and respectful nature of his brothers, especially Yudhisthira, who patiently endured the taunts of his cousins. Numerically, there were 100 cousins against 5 of them, but Bhima was the equalizer. So that's the description from Mahabharata. And continuing this narration, just to highlight something of the king's functioning, the next day, the boys called after Bhima. So there's a little part in between that I've left out, but it'll become apparent because the Kauravas, actually 3 of them make a plan to take revenge on Bhima. So the next day, the boys called after Bhima as he walked by the river. They came running towards him with a basket and smiles on their faces. What game are they up to now, Bhima wondered. But when they pulled out the cake, Bhima's eyes lit up. And these are the words of one of the Kauravas. Bhima, we are getting older now, and we are supposed to be more mature, said Dushasan in his most serious demeanor. So, we brought you this peace offering in the hope we could put aside our animosities and become friends. Bhima's suspicions dropped by the wayside, and he devoured the cake like a ravenous wolf. The cake accomplished what the hundreds of them could not. Bhima fell to the ground like a log. The cake was laced with poison, and he was out cold. The brothers bound him hand and foot and dragged him to a cliff overlooking the deepest part of the river, and of course they throw him in. So it continues in Mahabharata, this particular description, that the 4 brothers searched for Bhima until the last streaks of the sun disappeared below the horizon and darkness covered the land. They returned home late that night, weary and cold. The next day, Bhima was still missing. Kunti and her sons were perplexed at Bhima's absence. At each passing day, their hearts grew heavier. This is not like Bhima, Kunti repeated again and again. He would never go off like this without a word to anyone. The Pandavas approached Dhritarashtra for the sake of their grieving mother. So here we come to see the role of the king. Is he fulfilling this role of advising, educating, nourishing his dependents? This is his response. Because the king appears very unconcerned, and this is what he says, King Dhritarashtra. Your brother's a strong boy. He can take care of himself. Sometimes to seek adventure, boys will run away. Such things happen, so do not be alarmed. I'm sure he'll come back according to his own time. So, very relaxed. The other boys are only asking him the question because it's on behalf of their mother. And this is his response, very unconcerned. And as they left the royal court, Arjuna was annoyed. So you hear how the Pandavas are processing the king's behavior towards them. So Arjuna says, he doesn't really care about us. We're a thorn in his side. And Yudhisthira pleads, Arjuna, please don't speak like that. The king loves us like his own sons. That's Yudhisthira. Yudhisthira, you're under illusion. He takes care of us simply because he's obliged to honor our father's memory. That's all. That's Arjuna's response to Yudhisthira. So they're understanding the king's behavior in a very particular way, really doubting that there's any caring. And Srila Prabhupada adds in Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, these are Srila Prabhupada's words. In fact, Dhritarashtra had usurped the kingdom and was now intriguing to dispose of the 5 Pandava brothers. Akrura knew that all the sons of Dhritarashtra, headed by Duryodhana, were very crooked politicians. Dhritarashtra did not act in accordance with the good instructions given by Bhishma and Vidura. Instead, he was being conducted by the ill instructions of such persons as Karna and Shakuni. Akrura decided to stay in Hastinapura for a few months to study the whole political situation. That's Srila Prabhupada writing in Krishna book. So I'm ending there because that's how much these verses yielded for today. If there's any thought on the matter, some to expand what I've been able to extract.
One thing that is of today's interest is because, you can avoid following the news of the investigation that is on the January 6th insurrection. And yesterday, part of the things that were discussed was the moment in which the previous president took the ill advice of a group of, crooked sort of some lawyers, like that. And it was a particular meeting in which all the professional lawyers of the White House were telling him, it's all finished, now move on and concede and, and do these are the legal situations, like that. And then there came this group of ill advisors that were telling him all kinds of things, and then the man decided to go with the ill-advised stuff. And then that was the moment that triggered the whole disaster, political disaster. So just thinking about, verse number 4 that says that Akrura was going to observe this king who was taking ill advice, and acting improperly. So, yes.
Oh, thank you very much.
Duryodhana also, he was taking ill advice from Shakunis and Karna, Dushashan, all those, And then he was thinking that this is not religion. Religion is this, good. But because of his ill advice by others, he was always go to the other direction. He was trying to kill Pandava so many times. So it's because of all this. Same thing in the Ramayana also, because of mantra, Kaikai got bad advice from her, and then Lord Ram has to vanish for 14 years. So. Same with Ravana, So the best thing for us is to know where to get a proper advice. If we get a bad advice, then we could be in the same situation.
Yeah, I'm just remembering yesterday when I was looking at the Mahabharata that Duryodhana himself was advising his father, King Dhritarashtra, and taking into account what was known of him, that he was extremely envious and conniving. There was a description that he goes to King Dhritarashtra and says, you know, it's a very pleasant time of the year, there's this beautiful city, and I'm actually constructing a villa in that city. And King Dhritarashtra is hearing it, you know, getting quite eager as to what Duryodhana's going to tell him. And Duryodhana says, yes, and I'm planning to actually, you know, encourage the Pandavas to take a little vacation in that city. And at that time, I'm going to offer them the villa. And the king is, you know, he understands the thinking of Duryodhana. And he says, oh, but what's going to transpire? And Duryodhana tells him, oh, I have everything very nicely managed. And it's not that the king questioned, wanted to know any details. He just accepted that some arrangement was going to be made. He didn't pursue it further. And the missing part was, of course, Duryodhana not explaining that the rooms in which the Pandavas would be resting were rooms that would be made of highly flammable materials that could go up in fire in a second. So, yes, indeed, even his son had taken control in the sense of being an advisor. Yes, going back to the point of the former temple president, it's interesting. Huh? Yes, I said the former. No, former. The former president, the particular lawyer that's popped up as having been one of the first ill advisors, apparently a couple of days later, he was making a request for a pardon. So there was, you know, some understanding of the implications on the part of that ill advisor. But one doesn't hear that there's any of that kind of concern either on the part of Duryodhana, Karna, Dushashan, Sakuni. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your contribution, and thank you for kindly being present in the class. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.